Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, the Republican National Convention is over. Tonight we get analysis from political consultants at the convention site in Cleveland and here in studio. A convention wrap-up next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. The Republican National Convention concluded tonight as Donald Trump accepted the GOP presidential nomination with a spirited and lengthy address. Joining us now with analysis on the convention and where Republicans go from here are Arizona political consultants Chuck Coughlin, president of High Ground Public Affairs Consultants, Stan Barnes, founder and president of Copper State Consulting Group, and joining us live via satellite from the Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland, Constantine Carrard, founder of Grassroots Partners. Good to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. Constantine, I want to start with you because you are there in Cleveland. You are on site for Donald Trump's acceptance speech tonight. Paint the picture for us. How was it accepted? How was it received? And how did the Arizona delegation take it?
Well, I think like a lot of conventions, you won't be surprised to know that the hall is packed with people who love the nominee. So obviously inside the hall, it's always sort of a raucous good time, and it's an hour later and you can still kind of hear the balloons popping in the background. So the hall obviously loved what he had to say. The Arizona delegation reacted really favorably to it. So now I think the question is going to be is how the viewing public nationally looks at it.
What do you think about that? Again, you are kind of in that bubble, but once you get out of that now, once you get done with us and get out of that arena, how do you think folks will take tonight's speech and the convention overall?
I think they'll react favorably to this speech. You know, he has an advantage being a populist as opposed to a conservative. Usually in the primaries, you've sort of run to the right as a conservative, or our previous nominees have at least endeavored to portray themselves as conservatives. Then they've got to get back to the middle. But as a populist, he was kind of there already. So his speech tonight ranged kind of from the right on issues like defense and taking care of veterans and Blue Lives Matter, all the way far left on issues like trade, where he made several kind of obvious advances on Bernie Sanders voters. So he's able to do that a lot easier than a regular nominee does because he starts in the center with relatively populist positions.
As far as his performance is concerned, some have described it as somewhat stilted for a Donald Trump. Again, what kind of reception there on the floor? It seemed like some applause lines didn't necessarily get what he was looking for, and other times people erupted into applause when maybe he wasn't expecting it. What did you see there?
No, I thought he did fairly well because, again, he's working off of a teleprompter, which is not his natural style, but you can see how much better he's gotten at it. So he clearly worked at it and practiced it. So, you know, for the environment, working off the teleprompter, he did fairly well. You know, he ad-libbed a few times, which I think is to be expected. I don't think you can ever really script a candidate like Donald Trump. But I thought it seemed relatively smooth here. I think you're used to kind of a wilder, freer Donald Trump. But that may not be a bad thing if people see him, you know, acting sort of more, they consider more traditionally presidential in terms of appearance and presentation.
So, Constantine, this is Chuck. There's a couple of unconventional moments in the speech that you've already mentioned. One on trade, and in Ivanka's introduction, there was a reference to equal pay and some issues on social policy and equity policies on pay. How did the hall react to that, and how do you think more traditional conservatives respond to that message outside the hall and inside the hall? I'm interested in hearing your thought.
I think you probably get two reactions because, again, the folks inside the hall were just, you know, fervent supporters of Donald Trump, and you know his kids always do so well. They, you know, kids are reminded, but you know his children do really well. They present well, they speak well, they really reflect well upon him. So she could say just about anything, and I think the crowd would have loved it. You know, you're at a Republican National Convention and she says, I don't really identify as a Republican or a Democrat. And it was an applause line. And that's not supposed to be an applause line at a Republican National Convention. Outside the hall, we'll see how it plays. But again, I think outside the hall, their goal is a very broad swath of voters. I think we have two candidates that are sort of historically unfavorable. And so from that standpoint, I think Trump has the advantage of being able to range from the far left to the far right on a range of issues where Hillary really can't. She can't convincingly deliver a center-right message on almost any issue. Outside of maybe trade, there's not an issue she could get to his right on. So she has potentially a narrower portion of the electorate she can appeal to. So that might give him an advantage.
Yeah, Constantine, this is Stan. I'm on the same frequency as Chuck. There were some real pointed moments in this speech that we as Republicans never thought perhaps we'd see in our lifetime in a Republican convention. One of them was the point Chuck made on trade. The other one was on the LGBTQ issue. And not only did he say it, but then he drove it by thanking everybody for applauding it. And I was on the couch thinking, I'm watching history here. What did it feel like in the hallway?
I think everybody responded favorably to it. Again, I think what I found was people's reactions afterwards wasn't necessarily that he was more inclusive in his message or mentioned more groups or singled more of them out. What was interesting is that it was a very long speech. I don't know where it ranks historically, but it was a relatively long speech, and I don't remember him mentioning God a single time. And I think that's, 4 years ago the Democrats booed God at their convention. This year, I'm not sure if they actually mentioned him in this speech, which I think would be its own kind of historic moment. I don't know, deliberate or not, but a lot of people went through the writing of a speech like that, and I think that absence was probably noticed more by conservatives than anything he included. Because listen, the civil rights. Ted Cruz did the same thing the night before. The civil rights extend to everybody. They cover everybody, regardless of how you choose to live your life. So that's a conservative message. Maybe it has a hint of libertarianism to it, but that's a healthy thing. But I think what I got from some conservatives wasn't necessarily what was in the speech as that one thing that was left out of the speech.
Constantine, you mentioned Ted Cruz, and I want to get your thoughts. You are a Cruz supporter. Did he do the right thing by not endorsing Donald Trump from the stage?
The political question, we'll have to answer like 5 or 10 years from now. I think he did the right thing as far as holding a sort of firm position. In an odd sort of way, we heard remarks that sort of yesterday the most Trump-like thing that was done on the stage was done by Ted Cruz, because no one in their right minds thinks that if they had gone after Melania and Fred Trump and won, that Donald Trump would have flown his plane to Cleveland to get on the stage and endorse Ted Cruz. So from that standpoint, standing the ground, defending your wife, defending your father, was the right thing to do. To his credit, though, he showed up. He made this speech. He congratulated him by name, where a lot of other folks skipped the convention or sent a video. I don't know that the people in the hall that were being whipped to boo necessarily appreciated that difference last night. Time will tell if a year or two from now they feel differently. Safe to say last night they didn't, but it was unusual because you had the fellows in the yellow hats actually whipping the boo votes out of New York to kind of create that scene. And politically, I don't understand that. You wouldn't want to send a divided message on the Wednesday night, but they seem to go to trouble to actually do that.
Chuck, do you think Ted Cruz did the right thing, or some are saying his political career is over?
I think it was absolutely Cruz-like. That he is what he is, and I think that's what Constantine is speaking to. Is that to expect him to come to the convention and abdicate as a constitutional conservative that ground to a guy who is a undefined entity in that world. I never expected him to do it, and I was quite frankly surprised that he showed up. So the question then becomes more of an etiquette question, as do you go to Donald Trump's convention, his birthday party, if you will,
yes,
and then dump on the floor, and that's sort of what he did. And so I think the calculus, as Constantine pointed out, is just right. How's that going to be judged 4 years from now?
What do you think, Stan?
It feels to me like he stood up for his own philosophy and honor, and I give him points for that. But in terms of his electability in 2020, if this was his Reagan to Ford in 1976, that he failed on that score. I don't think he did himself any favors by going there, leading everybody to the edge, and then not delivering. The very next moment, he's in front of the Texas delegation, and half of that delegation wanted his head on a platter. So that's part of my evidence. I don't think it worked for him.
I wanted to ask Constantine, if I could, a question on how did Joe Arpaio go over in the convention hall today? It seemed to me that Trump, our nominee, doubled down on the immigration message today in a more draconian way than I expected. But I guess I shouldn't underestimate that. But how did it go? How was the reception for our sheriff in the hall, Constantine?
They really loved him in the hall. Actually, the day before, I almost missed the Cruz speech because I was actually with him, kind of trying to get him back and forth to Media Row for interviews. And trying to get through this hall with him is really difficult. I mean, the number of pictures you've got to stop and take along the way. So, I mean, they love to hear from him. He actually did a really good job with the speech. You never know how it's going to go. I don't think he's used to teleprompters either. So from that standpoint, he did a good job. He was well received in the hall.
Constantine, as far as the convention as a whole, we heard an awful lot about Hillary Clinton. I mean, some of the previous speakers mentioned Hillary Clinton exponentially more times than they mentioned Donald Trump. Was that a smart thing to do? Obviously resonated with those at the convention, but do you think that will resonate with those outside the hall?
Well, everybody on the campaign trail.
I think to a certain degree you have two candidates with really high unfavorables. They're fairly well defined. The interesting thing with Hillary, though, is that she has a really long history of scandals and problems and issues that ought to be brought up. And there are a lot of voters who aren't old enough to remember all of her issues. If you talk Rose Law Firm, with a voter who's 25 or 30 years old, they have no idea what you're talking about. So from that standpoint, to the degree that his unfavorables are even higher than hers, they probably made the calculus that they do have to drive home certain points. And she has certain issues, whether it's Benghazi or the server or things that frankly ought to be automatic disqualifiers from being considered for the presidency. And if any of those messages could stick, if they could drive any of those messages home to where voters understood that, you know, everything else put aside, you're right, that right there disqualifies you from consideration, they might be able to move the numbers, because this is going to be a World War I style trench warfare, 3 yards at a time kind of a race. So whatever they can do to make up ground, they're going to do.
Well, I would say that's the kind of race that he wants to run for sure. That was the tenor of the speech tonight, was he wants a ground war campaign. He wants him to dictate the terms of the debate. I think we're going to see that. We're going to find out if that is the terms that are accepted next week. And I've maintained all along, if she chooses that, it will be a very tight race. If she chooses to redefine and extend, I would say go to the spread offense.
Yes.
And play a more aggressive strategy, because I was surprised on the immigration issue today. I've done polling on Arizona voters on, say, our two senators' support of the Gang of Eight proposal. I find a bare majority, but a majority of Republican primary voters actually support that proposal. So, and vast majorities of voters in Arizona support a much more aggressively pro-immigration border security policy. I think arguably we have secured the border in terms of in a manner that was significantly different than it's been since 2010, when it was became the real hot button issue.
Real quickly, Constantine, we got to let you go here in a minute or two. So overall, you're advising the Trump campaign. They've just hired you on. Congratulations. What do you tell them?
I need to call my mom. She's not going to believe it. Look, I think to a certain degree they are who they are. They appear to have sort of left the conservative message. Again, the loudest applause line of the night in the arena was appointing conservative judges who would defend the Constitution. But they seem to have kind of passed the conservative message on to surrogates. So you'll see the NRA do the Second Amendment and Tony Perkins talk social issues. I think they ought to double down, actually get into the cities, get into the inner cities, talk to the neighborhoods, explain how liberalism has failed and how Hillary Clinton is liberalism, and explain how their lives could be so much better. Usually the Republican can't get through the media filter to get that message through to those neighborhoods. But Trump's coverage is so different that if Trump says it, they will hear it. Now, he has to say it 100 times for them to really understand that he's serious about it. But that might actually move the numbers where he needs to in the swing states that matter.
All right, very good. Constantine Carrard, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you staying up late for us, and safe travels home. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Gentlemen, I want to get back to this idea that it seemed as though Hillary Clinton was the star of this convention for many of these speakers. I mean, it wasn't so much what we're going to do, it seemed as though it's what we're not going to let her do.
Here's the simple reason. She's the single unifying factor of everybody in that arena. In fact, it could be the unifying factor of the Republican Party in 2016, is that we don't want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States. Trump didn't do that much of it. I thought maybe he'd do more. He did a lot, I get it, a lot of people did, but he balanced it with a lot of other things. I had this feeling when I was watching him. You remember, I'm a Teddy Roosevelt guy. I know a lot of people are. When you see old black and white footage of Roosevelt, he looks like he's exhausted after he's done speaking because he's pounding his fists and he's sweating and he's emphasizing. And I got a little bit of that from Trump tonight. I mean, when have we seen such a passionate speech from a Republican, normally a stiff, normally somebody that's trying to behave in the box? But Trump was just breaking all the rules tonight, and I think it played to his advantage.
Do you think that was a passionate speech? Because I've heard some people say they thought he looked a little stilted for Donald Trump.
But he was. I mean, he hit his lines really well. I mean, let's admit what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a master marketer, and he used tonight's speech to frame what he wants the campaign to be about, which, as we've just talked about, is an agenda, is a referendum on where the country is today from his perspective. I mean, he said, I'm going to make America rich again. Last time I checked, we are still the richest country on the earth. We're in the world. But he's portraying a very dark vision of where we are today. If you look at national polls, a lot, and state polls, people's approval rating of the federal government is at an all-time high, or unapproval or disapproval rating is at an all-time high. So he's speaking to that message set of hanging around that status quo and that dysfunctionality without the burden of ideology wrapped around him. He can be a free market guy in terms of his rhetoric because he can lay everything, trade, immigration, all of these things at her feet without owning any of it himself.
He's no Reagan. He's Donald Trump. But Reagan, when he ran against Carter in 1980, had some of the same broad sweep. That the country felt the malaise. That was the word we used, right?
Yes.
The country felt like we weren't what we used to be, that what we read about. And Trump's doing the same play this time.
But you mentioned Reagan, and for Reagan, it was morning in America.
That's right.
I'm already
This is
hearing that with
nighttime.
Trump, it's midnight in America.
It is, the bell's ringing.
What happened to the idea of hope? Not necessarily hope and change.
I knew you were going to say that.
But hope and a positive, like we are the best, we'll do this, as opposed to he's running out there saying the American dream is dead.
And that is Constantine just articulated. They want trench warfare. The Trump campaign wants a trench warfare. They want the Clinton campaign to be battling in Pennsylvania. They want them battling in Ohio. They want them battling in New Jersey. They want them battling in New York, in those traditional states. The question has always been to me, this is Hillary's campaign to lose. Mm-hmm. And if she plays defense, if she plays prevent defense and looks at the Democratic map from a traditional perspective, she can lose this campaign because he's going to play in their backyard on those issues of trade. He's going to play in their backyard on the issue of immigration, which will play better in Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We've been baptized in that message out here. We know the answer. Our biggest trading partner is Mexico. We need immigration to work. We need a secure border. We need the nation's attention to be on Mexico as a foreign policy issue, not as a domestic policy issue.
Do we need the wall? He's going to build the wall.
Well, that box has been checked, and whether you support it or not, that's part of the rhetoric, and it's not unwinding. But we have a new entrant. The new entrant is law and order candidate.
Yes.
The law and order candidate.
Many
I'm telling you
times.
what. I mean, Chuck, I asked you the same question. If you can be with the law and order side, or you can be with the Black Lives Matter side, which side do you want in a national election? And I'm telling you, Trump is owning the law enforcement side. That's a center-right majority in this country, and it's a big deal.
Some of his biggest applause lines were no prosperity without law and order. An attack on officers is an attack on all Americans. I am the law and order candidate. Is he enough of that law and order candidate to siphon votes away from some of these disaffected Democrats that are out there?
I don't think so. I think it's a way of them, if they respond to that message, how do they respond to that message? And I think it's a nuanced message that the Democrats will have to be able to articulate, and that is that we're in a new era of technology. What we're seeing today, and they need to admit this, we all need to admit this, what we're seeing today has been going on for the last 50 years in America. We're just seeing it now because there's body cameras, there's cell phone cameras, and we need to acknowledge that there's really good police officers out there defending me, you, and everybody else, but there's also guys on power trips and that feel intimidated. And the more and more you see that, and the Dallas chief said it, hey, we want you to be on our force. They need to make the police community. And so that's a message, that's a bridge message they can use to say in Philadelphia that they can articulate. But do they do that, or do they respond with, as a Black Lives Matter, do they? I think they're smart enough to figure that one out and figure out how to deal with that
I keep
rhetorically.
looking for clues in what has happened in the past. I used the Reagan one. Nixon did the same thing on the law and order side in 1968.
Yes.
I mean, he ran and that was a tumultuous time, and the center right of the country wanted to hear that message, and I think that's what's ringing.
We're going to hear. I mean, he said today we're going to eliminate crime. He came close to saying
That's
we're
what
going to
he
eliminate
said.
crime, and so we're going to see a big discussion tomorrow about what those crime statistics, what the FBI crime statistics really are. And there may be a big debate about that. But the perception of America, and Mr. Reality TV star knows
Yes,
this.
he does.
It's what they're seeing every day. What they saw, in Dallas, what they saw in Baton Rouge, what they see, and that is what he's playing to. He's going to play to that type of fear.
Was this convention overall a reality show? I mean, we had actors, we had underwear models, we had every member of the Trump family.
What's your problem with that? I don't get it.
I'm not, did I say I had a problem with it? I'm just saying.
Are you judging?
I'm just saying, are we seeing a new form of political presentation?
Yeah, we are. I mean, this is Donald Trump. This is reality TV. Not judging. This is reality TV. This is a guy speaking to the broad stroke of middle America. I got to admit, Chachi didn't do anything for me. But some of the other did pretty well. And the expectations were low. That this was going to be chaotic and divided, and no one of any importance was going to show up. And yet it was a great convention.
Well, but hold on a second here. I heard boos at Ted Cruz. I heard boos for Mitch McConnell. That doesn't sound like it's all that hunky-dory.
100 years ago, we used to have fistfights instead. I mean, this is a convention. It's democracy.
But Donald came away from this convention with a unified convention. I mean, that was the reality TV. He knew Cruz was not going to endorse him. So he choreographed. He had his guys, as Constantine said, down front, ready to incite the crowd. He walked out of the suite to turn his back on the crowd. He flew his plane over Cruz's rally the day before when Cruz was talking, and Cruz had to refer to the plane. I mean, this is a guy who is a master at the perception and master of TV.
So we went into this convention thinking the Republican Party was divided, that he may not even get the nomination, that there might be some skullduggery going on. Did the Republicans leave this convention better off than they went in?
I don't think there's any other way to see it. They went in with every elite commentator speculating on the very worst outcomes, and they did not happen. The closest we got was the Ted Cruz scenario, and as Chuck just well articulated, that ended up unifying and making Donald Trump look like the bigger man, a gracious man, a polite man. And so, as a Republican, I keep saying, if you could just dip Trump in a little bit of diplomatic hot sauce, he'd be so much better. If you just take the rough edges off of him.
Would he be better? I mean, come on.
I don't know. I think he is who he is. And so the question to me comes down to what happens next week. Do they follow the dog whistle? Do they do that, or do they run their agenda? Do they run Morning in America? Do they say we are on the cusp of recreating a new America, a great America with more opportunity for all, that represents a equal opportunity society, and some of the populism that Bernie brought to the stage of on the trade issues? Does she embrace that and say, I agree with him on that? Well, then the Republicans are going to be looking like, well, where's and that's going to be an interesting. I think you'll see a lot of national security Republicans that will have already walked away from Brent Scowcroft. Other people who have enormous reputations in the Republican community have walked away from Donald. I think that will continue. That'll be a thematic next week. In a scarier world, having a guy like that at the top is a scary place to be.
One more quick point.
Yes.
We're leaving out a very important point. Trump ran right at Washington. I'm with you. I'm your voice. And of course, Hillary is Washington. And that's going to be another divide in these campaigns.
He has an enormous advantage that way. That he has no ideology, he has no baggage from there. He's the outsider. He's the populist, as Stan said earlier. He's going to own that message. He's going to run the status quo against them.
We've only got 30 seconds left, but I mean, anyone who has any common sense will say, yeah, but that's one thing to say it. Can he get it done?
Well, my grand theory is the energy on the Republican side, or is on the Republican side. The energy in this 2016 election is not on the Democratic side. That's going to really play a factor.
You agree with that?
It's up to her.
Yeah.
That's where it's up to her. If she goes and runs a civil rights campaign in honor of immigration reform, that begins to shift the message to her side.
All right, gentlemen, we have run out of time. We could talk forever on this. Good to have you both here. Great discussion. Thank you so much. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.